Hello and welcome back to Mr. Excalibur. My name's Arthur and today we're looking at the Bushi tri-folded Katana from Dynasty Forge. What I actually wanted to do with this katana, because it is a folded steel blade, it's got 3 different of the 10 series high carbon steels all folded into this sword. I actually wanted to take this opportunity to discuss a couple things. One, the idea that it's an katana, it's oversized, and 2, whether or not you really need in modern day time a folded steel blade anymore. There's this whole mystique, of course, about the Japanese and how they would fold the steel over and over and over again. A lot of people forget that the reason why they did that was to create a much more uniform blade with a uniform amount of carbon throughout the entire blade. That was the reason why they constantly folded it over and over and over again. They wanted to get a much more uniform amount of carbon in the blade, and they had to literally smash out all the impurities. That's why they would, fold it again and again. Today, because of modern steels and how it's produced, there's a question as to whether or not that's really necessary anymore. And yet, we still have a market for swords that have these folded steel blades, or it's a Damascus pattern. So we're going to look at that. We do have the typical couple things here, and that is first of all looking at the unboxing, which was a little different with the Dynasty Forge here. I actually got this through Cult of Athena, but I also got this along with another Dynasty Forge sword. First of all, let's look at the unboxing. After that, I've actually got some footage here from somebody who asked the question about folded steel blades and whether or not that's really necessary anymore. So why don't we take a look at that right now.
So here we're unboxing the Dynasty Forge Bushi Tri-Steel Folded Silver Wave Katana. Big long title. As you guys saw in another video that I did, actually this is the first one, I can't remember, I ordered 2 of these Dynasty Forge katanas at the same time. Both of them came from Cult of Athena. Both of them came essentially unboxed. I mean, there was the overall sending box, but inside both swords were essentially just wrapped in packing paper, which was a little different. I really was kind of surprised. Now, when I first drew this sword just to kind of see what it felt like, the initial impressions weren't that different than what I had when I drew the Ronin Katana number 9. That's their Katana, and it was this immediately the feeling of this heavy blade. Now, yes, it was very pretty. The hada on it was subtle, but I mean, you could see it. It was nice. The fuller that it had gave it a nice look to it as well. I have to admit, for a sword that was in this price range, I did expect it to be a little sharper. But as you guys can see here, the paper test, it did pretty well. It shaved it off pretty well on that first off. So I mean, sharpness is a very subjective thing. Is it shave the hair off your back of your arm? Maybe, maybe not. Here's an up close of the blade and of the Tsuba. I've got some better pictures coming up from both Dynasty Forge and Cult of Athena. They just do better photographic work. There's the Fuchi on the back end. Both were really nice reliefs. The casting on Dynasty Forge's Silver Wave O Katana here really were quite nice. Unfortunately, that it ends up actually being a detriment because the reliefs are so sharp they actually hurt my hand. I'll talk about that later during the cutting. Now here was a bit of a downside, and that was that the eyelets on the Saya plug came loose, which was kind of strange. And of course you have that nice end cap which matched everything else. So I mean, out of the box, interesting. Not sure yet.
Who is a lot of things. You are a swordsmith, but you are also a martial arts expert. Can you introduce yourself?
Ja, also mein Name ist Stefan Roth. Ich mache seit 44 Jahren Kampfkunst und seit 20 Jahren schmiede ich Schwerter ab.
So what you do is someone can approach you and ask you to make his dream sword, and it doesn't really matter what origin it has. So it could be a Japanese sword, it could be a European sword, it could be an Oriental sword.
Yeah.
You could technically go into a museum, take a photo, and then approach you. And then wait 3 years until you deliver, right?
Ja, also man kann zu mir kommen und ich schmiede ganz individuelle Schwerter. Ich habe auch immer sehr viele wissenschaftliche Projekte, wo wir versuchen, einfach alte Techniken wieder zu rekonstruieren und wieder ins Leben zu erwecken. Also wir schmieden also sehr, sehr viel mit Luppenstahl oder Tamahagene. Und das unterscheidet uns, glaube ich, doch wesentlich von vielen anderen Schmieden, die also meistens nur aus Federstahl oder halt aus dem sogenannten Damaszener-Stahlschwerter schmieden.
And I understand a modern katana made from really good material. Is that, from the standpoint of a fighter in combat, superior to a traditionally made katana with tamahagene?
Also was die Kampftauglichkeit betrifft, würde ich sagen, ist ein moderner Stahl definitiv besser als ein traditioneller Stahl. Also man muss ganz klar differenzieren zwischen einem japanischen Kunstschwert und einem Lego-Schwert oder Sportgerät, so wie man es heutzutage herstellt.
If one of these antique masters would have had access to modern steel, like order it online or something, he would have preferred that and not going through this procedure to, fold the tamahagene until it's pure enough, right?
Also ich denke, dass viele Meister sich nach dem modernen Stahl die Finger geleckt hätten. Allerdings muss man natürlich das in Japan auch ein bisschen differenziert sehen, weil eine japanische Schmiede, eine traditionelle japanische Schmiede ist ein heiliger Ort. Das heißt, es sind dort shintoistische Rituale werden dort vollzogen. Der Schmied trägt praktisch den Hakama und Gi, also Jacke und Hosenrock, genauso wie der Priester im shintoistischen Schrein.
But I understand that folding a modern steel is nonsense because there is no need for doing this. So a modern steel, nobody would care to fold it, right?
Ja, das ist absolut richtig. Also heutzutage braucht man Stahl natürlich nicht mehr zu falten. Man macht das zwar um Damaststahl zu erzeugen, aber das macht man aus reiner Erzeugung von Mustern und Oberflächen und so weiter.
And it is quite beautiful, I think.
So here we have the cutting experience I had with the Silver Wave O Katana by Dynasty Forge. As I'm just kind of going through some warm-ups here and a little bit of kata and just some practicing, getting how it felt, which by the way was very heavy. Guys, I have to admit something right off the bat at this point. I had done kind of a batch of swords to review and to do cutting tests with at this point. This one was the third one of the day. Unfortunately, very unwise of me, it was also the heaviest one of the day. And I gotta admit, this cutting footage, a lot of it is outright embarrassing. But the weight of the thing, it did add to cutting through some of these heavier plastic water bottles. For those of you who are kind of into the backyard cutting thing and want to actually use it as a serious test of what these various swords will do, keep in mind that some of these, these juice bottles, some of these heavier, bottles you get at various grocery stores and various distributors, they're actually pretty decently heavy plastic, and they can actually scratch up your blade pretty good. That being said, it's a pretty good test of how tough these swords are. Now, this kind of gives you an idea of how sharp this thing is. It looks like I missed, right? Yeah, look again. I literally shaved the corner off the cap of this thing. And then, of course, proceeded to, fillet this. Now, for those of you who, aren't into tamashigiri or aren't into, constantly buying those stores, milk bottles actually are a pretty good substitute because of how thin they are, how big they are, how much liquid they actually hold. You can really test your cutting, at least in my limited opinion, admittedly, by basically shaving them down and creating the little rings of the plastic by cutting them down slice by slice. And there I am just kind of hauling off and just basically using this thing almost like a sharpened baseball bat. Like I said, guys, I'm not too proud of this footage this time around. I mean, it did the job. I have to admit, it was sharp enough. That juice bottle actually got 2 swings at it, which you don't normally get. This one is really bad. I can't even quite look at this as I'm narrating for it. That is a bottle that I got from a grocery store, filled it with water, and it literally bounced. And oh, look at that, it bounced again. Yeah, that was bad. Here it is for the 3rd try. I finally just put it up on one of these sawhorses to do just a good downward strike on it, and yeah, it finally cut. I can't, that was awful. I still look at it and cringe. Here's the, the dry milk bottle test, and by this time, I have to admit, I was tired. I was kind of annoyed with myself of just how bad this was, and it cleaved the top off. If you saw that little piece come off. Now, here is where this heavier blade really comes into play. Now, you can already see how far down it went into that cardboard box. And here's some other footage of it. Cardboard actually isn't that bad of a test when looking at, some semi-hard targets, especially if you let it sit out in the sun after it's gotten wet. It actually hardens and becomes an actual tougher target. Plus, those TV boxes have some styrofoam fillers in there to hold what it originally came in. This is a high carbon steel blade. It may have 3 different steels that were included in the forging process, but they're all high carbon steels. Now, to give you an idea of just how important this is, in a previous review, I went through the same process of cleaning it off, spraying it down with WD-4, which, by the way, isn't exactly lubricant. It's more of a cleaning agent than anything. It does serve as kind of a very light lubricant, but it mostly is it degreases, it cleans, gets all the muck off from, cutting through water bottles and boxes and all the sticky stuff. But unless you do it, they will rust. And in my experience just recently, I had one just spotted just a little bit. Apparently I didn't get all the water off, and they will rust. So please make sure you clean off, lubricate your blades before you put them away so you can play with them again.
initial impression, like you guys heard in the unboxing and again during the cutting, was that this thing was heavy. This thing still has an enormous amount of weight hanging off the end here. And I want to show you guys something here very interesting. Here you have, you know, a much larger blade, and yet this is actually another model from Dynasty Forge, and there'll be a review of this a little later on. But as you guys can see, the handle length is virtually the same. So I don't know if that's a better view there. Yep. About the same. And yet you've got arguably, you know, 2-3 inches more steel hanging off the end. Now, for those of you who know anything about how steel is balanced and all that kind of stuff, obviously that much more steel hanging off the end is going to seriously throw off the balance of this sword. The other thing I found interesting about it was the whole idea of it being a folded steel blade. Now, as you guys saw in the footage that we put in there, the real only purpose in having a folded steel blade is, quite honestly, for artistic impression. There is this, I guess you could say, almost marketing ploy that the idea of advertising it as a folded steel blade makes people remember the days, and it hails back to the actual Japanese swords when they were folded steel over and over and over again. Well, as we heard in that footage, in reality, because of how modern steel is made, the idea of folding steel and making a good sword out of it really isn't a necessary concept anymore when it comes to making a katana. It's just, it was a process that was designed by the Japanese to be very functional. They had a material that started out with a lot of impurities. Their method for getting rid of those impurities was to heat the material, actually take two different kinds of, two different pieces of material that had two different levels of carbon in them, put them together, and literally smash them together in forge welding, and, you know, fold them over and over again until they A, remove those impurities, and B, gotten a uniform level of carbon content throughout the entire blade. That isn't necessary anymore with modern steel. I like the comment they said in that clip where they said Japanese, if you'd taken a blacksmith from you know, medieval Japan and give him the choice of the iron sand they would start out with, or the tamahagane jeweled steel that they wound up with after they'd smelted it, or modern steel, they would have gone after modern steel in a heartbeat. All of that being said, the purpose today of having folded steel is to give this nice hada that we have on the blade. In other words, the pattern that you see of the blade being folded together. And hopefully the pictures that we showed you of this, both from Dynasty Forge and from Cult of Athena, showed off that blade very well. My camera skills aren't that great, so I wasn't able to show it, although I gave it my best. At least best with what I got. But overall, I thought the sword just was very, very heavy. When I first got it, the eyelets here along the side plug were loose. In fact, they're almost falling out. The Kashira right underneath the Tsuba is loose. And quite honestly, for a sword that is, there's a bit of a price discrepancy here that I wanted to go over. Originally, this goes for between $700 and $800 through Dynasty Forge, and in some cases even higher. Currently, Dynasty Forge had a deal where they were kind of slashing a lot of their prices. I didn't necessarily want to get it through Dynasty Forge because I didn't want to wait for it to come through Canada, where Dynasty Forge is located. Instead, I wanted to continue dealing with a distributor that I knew, and so I gave them the sale price that Dynasty Forge was having, and said could they match that, and they pretty much did. So, be that as it may, I got it at a sub MSRP price. But this sword is definitely in the $500–600 plus range. And for that money, as opposed to things that are below that $500–400 price range, for those, for those swords that are below that, this one's above it, and I start to expect at least the pieces to come, nice, fit, and tight. The Ito wrap was fine enough, and was actually comfortable enough. But like I said, there were just a couple aesthetics that I thought were a little off. I have to admit, the Silver Wave theme on here and underneath, it acted like sandpaper in my hands. I decided to use bare hands again with this, and shame on me. There's a reason why I've always used gloves. But at the same time, you shouldn't have to, not with this kind of design of a sword. And while the reliefs are very nice and are very crisp, it was not very forgiving on the hand. For what you're getting with the tri-folded Silver Wave Katana from Dynasty Forge, my impression, and I have to admit, I'm starting to get a little bit out of my range here as far as what I know about katanas that are in this price range. My impression is that you can do better. Aesthetically, it's very pretty. It's a nice looking sword, but one, I think it suffers from the same thing that I found with Ronin Katana's Katana, and that was it's too blade heavy. And for some people looking for a sword, for maybe it's their first one, or maybe they are somewhat of a skilled practitioner, I think there's probably some better options out there. So at the end of the day, is it worth your money? I have to say, kind of no. My impression with it was just kind of and I don't really know why. All I know was that I just, the idea of the tri-folded steel blade, that doesn't really impress me much. It's nice to look at, it's nice to see that craftsmanship, but outside of that, no biggie for me. So, I hope what I've included here has been a little bit different for today. As far as the information, not necessarily just a bunch of guys who are all going ooh, oh, but actually going into really what's involved in making these. So, I hope it was informative for you. I hope you enjoyed it. Please comment, please subscribe. As far as the comments are concerned, guys, let me know what you think of these things. I put them out there. I enjoy putting them together. Some of you may like the cinematic music that I put in the background. Some of you may not. So I've heard some people say really cool tunes. I've read other people saying, man, that stuff is real annoying. I like doing it because I like doing it. I'm not really doing these to make money. Obviously, that's copyrighted music material, so I don't ever intend on making money off of this. But let me know how I'm doing with these things, and I've got quite a few of these at this point. So let me know how I'm doing, if I'm just way off or I'm covering the material well, and we'll see you guys later. Bye for now.